Hello, everybody, and welcome to the New Jersey Globe's post-New Jersey primary live stream. So we had a pretty interesting Tuesday night. It was the first line-free Democratic primary in a long, long time. It was a pretty regular Republican primary, at least in terms of ballot design, but lots of interesting things still happened on that side. So I think we got a lot to talk about. We sort of previewed what the races were going to look like on Thursday. We got some things right. We maybe got some things wrong. And now we're here to talk about what actually happened. So I'm Joey Fox from the New Jersey Globe. I'm joined by my boss, Dave Wildstein of the New Jersey Globe, Micah Rasmussen of the Rebovich Institute for New Jersey Politics at Rider University, and Ryan Dubicki, an elections researcher at the AP. So thanks everybody for joining us. If you're watching, you might be acquainted with our various live streams at this point. So we'll just jump right in. Again, as I said before, tons of interesting election results. David, what was your biggest takeaway coming away from Tuesday night?
So to me, the biggest is in the first election without a line on the Democratic side, how a lot of county organizations figured out how to deal with it and work out a new plan, a new system. And then you could compare that to Republicans that had lines in their own county, and how those lines, maybe for the very last time ever, have held, certainly in the Senate race. And then the other thing that I thought was really interesting is that where lines in certain cases didn't hold was at a local level, on the Democratic side, where you had some municipal elections that went a different way, and I think it may be that might be the place that needs the line the most, because they don't know how to do it any other way. And I think we're going to be talking about that a lot more, down the road, is how do municipalities who have just grown accustomed to not worrying about primaries because they had the line and that wasn't a big deal to them, but how are they going to cope with the new rules? And that might be, this may have been a wake-up call to local campaigns that they're going to have to modernize the way they do things also.
And I would add that the county organizations, like Monmouth, for just one example, the Republicans, this is a really good case where they sort of have led the local effort in many cases on who gets that line. Other counties do the same thing, and they are now going to have to get used to not being in that role anymore. That it is going to be the locals that are going to have to play the role, because the counties aren't going to have that designation to give away anymore.
And I think that there was an interesting primary. It's kind of funny that the very first primary we're mentioning is not any of the big ticket items, but a council primary in Piscataway. But I think it's a good example of sort of what we're talking about here, where that was a line-free primary. There was a candidate for mayor, Stacey Berger, who has been one of a pretty loud activist against the line. She lost a council race a couple years ago by a very narrow margin, and she said that she sort of argued that loss was in part to blame, that the line was in part to blame for that loss. So she ran for mayor this year and lost again, even without the line. She lost by something like 14 or 15 percentage points. But what's notable is that two members of her slate picked up 2 council seats. And specifically in the context of when we're talking about how do these organizations deal with the line, or the lack of a line, if the line is indeed struck down longer term beyond just this one primary. You saw a situation where, had the incumbent mayor been directly slated with his council running mates, you have to wonder whether there would have been a different outcome. But because voters were the ballot encouraged them to think about the races differently, they ended up treating the races differently. They ended up looking at the mayor, like there's a not insignificant number of voters looked at the mayor and said, great, like the job the mayor is doing, but looked at the other council candidate and said, well, actually, I like these two, even though they're not on the mayor's team. So again, relatively low profile primary compared to some of the other stuff that we're going to talk about tonight. But I think it's a really good microcosm of some of the issues that organizations are going to face in this new reality.
That's a really good point, and I think it cuts both ways, right? Because the renegades can run as teams too, and teams don't mean the same thing as what they meant before. So you can have the situation where the two council renegade candidates win, but their mayoral candidate didn't win because there's nothing that's tying them together on the ballot anymore.
Right.
Yeah, and you're getting split tickets at the local level, and you may get it at the commissioner level. One of the things that Andy Kim told me yesterday when we did a post-election talk is he sort of played down the idea that that even without the lines, the organizations can win. He said that the filing deadline came before Judge Krawashi's decision, and that campaigns need time to ramp up, and they didn't have time to ramp up. But I think also the organizations are going to have time. Now they've got a year to get themselves ready for the 25 primary.
And there were a couple of races this year that were going to be ramped up regardless of whether the line stayed in place or not. Like the Passaic County Sheriff's race and the race for Congress in the 8th District, where Rob Menendez won re-election, or won renomination, I should say. Those were races that were going to be red hot races, regardless of the ballot design. But even in the line-free world, you still saw the organization win. So I think that the people who are saying, well, when we get a full cycle to work through this, the results might be different. That's not necessarily wrong, but it also, there was evidence this year that even in these primaries that would have been contested no matter what, the organization still came out looking pretty good.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. No, I'm inclined to agree with you. As far as challengers go, you're not going to get better financed than Ravi Bala. You're not going to get better known than Jerry Speziale. You're not going to get better organized than Carol Murphy. So yes, it absolutely is true that a lot of challengers didn't have the opportunity to go out and know that they weren't going to be going against the line. And it will be interesting to see what a full cycle looks like. But it's not as if those three challengers were not top tier challengers in terms of, their ability to run against an organization. Yeah.
So before diving into specific races, I feel like one other point that can bring Ryan into this a little bit is turnout. Ryan, now that we've sort of got most of the votes counted, I know that there's still a few in some counties that are still waiting to come in. What's sort of the turnout picture looking like?
Yeah, so we're currently at roughly 490,000 votes for the Democrats, and we think based on going through all the county A5176 reports and looking at our vote history logs from prior elections, we think we're roughly 95% of the vote that's been counted. We think there's only like 5% of the vote remains outstanding, which puts us at current turnout of 520,000 for the Democrats. And that would be 21% of registered voters of 2.496 million registered Democrats, which is I was slightly off. I was predicting like 4 or 5. I was in the 560s when we met on Thursday, so a little bit lower than what I expected originally. Surprisingly, much lower than 2020. We're looking at 21% turnout for Democrats, and in 2020 is 41%. I'm sure there's a bunch of factors that play into that as well. For the Republicans, we're looking at roughly we think 98% of the vote is in already, based on what we've been receiving from the counties and stuff. We're looking at roughly 330,000, we think, once all the votes counted, which is 21% of registered voters as well. Same for the Democrats, and only 9% less in 2020 at 30%. So in terms of overall turnout, Republicans, I think they did better than Democrats because the drop off was not as much, 30% to 21%, and roughly we think. I personally think once all the votes counted too, advance is going to look like 58% for the Democrats and 30% for Republicans. So which would be the highest on record. 2023 last year was the highest, 55% for the Democrats, and then 29% for the Republicans. So advanced voting, and which is a big part of my job at least, is exceeding all past elections so far, which I find interesting. I thought it would be lower than 2023 because just the nature of 2023 was a lot different than this year. But I guess there was just not as much enthusiasm to go to the polls on election day as I personally thought. Other than that, though, I think, in terms of the vote count, it went really well on our end. All the advance votes were released first from all the counties, which was good. We appreciate that, and our models were accurate. No real complications on our end in terms of the tabulation. But in terms of overall turnout, it is lower than 2020. I thought it'd be like a little bit closer. I was more off of the Republicans, but in terms of the actual tabulation, though, no significant problems, which is good.
What one thing I would say about the early vote is that it is definitely, we know this, it's starting to be used by the organizations as an organizing tool. And so I think that's why we saw the boost this year. I mean, Brian Stack specifically organized around the early voting. And so I think we're going to see pockets. We're going to see early voting take off in pockets now where the organizations use it. But that's the difference between now and I think before.
Definitely. I think, I'm looking at the numbers right now. We're going to, let me pull that up really quick. Let's see. So yeah, I think if in terms of, also, I think one other point I wanted to mention is also the return rate. Because New Jersey purged roughly 200,000 voters off the vote by mail list just because they haven't voted in a while with the change of laws. The return actually gone up from 45% to 49%, so 4 percentage points, which is better for the Democrats. And the Republicans went up from 37 to 42. So it's a little bit better. It could be, I think that our return rate could be better. But and in terms of in-person early voting, though, we're looking at 200% of 2022. So as I actually predicted, roughly around there from Thursday. So I was happy with that. But yeah, I mean, as expected, advanced voting is eventually going to get more popular. Brian Stack is determined to make it more popular. And the more locations that open up when counties, if they receive the funding, they'll open up more locations and more people do it. Yeah, I think it's inevitable. I've seen in other states. For general elections, though, I think New Jersey, at least in the past 3 general elections, have been more consistent with advanced voting. For example, like in 2022, 30% of the vote was advanced, and in 2023, it only went up 4%, which is much more consistent than primary turnout data. So we'll see. I think November, it seems like it's far away, but it'll be here before you know it. But yeah, no, I agree. I think especially like on X, I see when more lawmakers and public figures vote early, they encourage that. More people will see that, and they'll do the same. So it's eventually just about getting the trend going. Is what it comes down to.
Well, for members of Congress, it's a nice little bonus because they had like a voting session on election day, so they could vote over the weekend and then go to Washington and then come back in the evening to celebrate their win.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
a lifestyle that seems kind of exhausting. I guess it's better to be from New Jersey than from like Oregon or something.
It seemed to me at one point on Tuesday, Gottheimer was flying up to Jersey in between votes, hopping in the shuttle, going back and just going. It just seemed like he didn't miss any votes, because when I hear of all these Gottheimer sightings, I'm thinking, wow, he's missing votes. So I went and checked. He didn't miss any, but it's just interesting how they do this, because they all manage it. And one other thing, and Ryan referenced this. I think what you're seeing now is Republicans are becoming more comfortable with voting in advance of Election Day. And, 4 years ago, they were told not to. And that hurt Jack Ciattarelli, and it hurt legislative candidates in 21. And, and it took some time to get Republicans comfortable. But one of the things I'm hearing from people on the Republican side is, wow, this is great. We can, it's a great experience. We go when we feel like it. We get over there, or we get this ballot at home, and I just fill it out and bring it to a box. So Republicans are determined to catch up. But one of the things that's very clear, from what I see, what Ryan posts every day during the election, Democrats were still receiving 75% of the vote by mail ballots, and they, New Jersey has a significant Democratic registration edge, but it's not a 3-to-1 edge. So Republicans still have a long way to go.
They've also somewhat embraced mail voting. Not incredibly high, but higher than 2022. Like, for example, in 2022, 18% of the vote was by mail for Republicans, and this year we're looking at 25%. So, which is it's not a humongous increase, but 7% increase is somewhat noticeable. And early voting is early voting, I think it's 247.8% compared to 2022 Republicans, and 291% for the Democrats. So I think it's pretty awesome, in my opinion. An overall advance has gone for both parties compared to 2022. I think once all the votes counted, we're looking at, I think, 128% of 2022 and for the Democrats and 124% advanced turnout from 2022.
Ryan,
So
are we seeing
yeah.
any places in the state where there's a dip, or is this just an upward progression of more and more
Um,
people doing this all the time?
so on the county and congressional district level, no, they've all increased since 2022. It could be because overall turnout didn't increase, like overall advanced turnout. I mean, but I have to look at I have not looked at the municipal level. I have not analyzed that, but the county level, congressional level, no. The highest district. Let's see. I'm just scrolling now. Looks like the fifth district is the highest. I'm sorry, the ninth district is the highest compared to 2022 at 157% for the Democrats. And the surprisingly, I mean, these are low numbers, but for the Republican, the eighth district, 206% advance compared to 2022. It's just, those are small numbers since there's not many Republicans in the eighth district where I live. But there's no
Reagan brought
decline.
3 new guys to the polls, and that raised
Yeah.
50 points. Yeah.
Yeah, but there is no dip, David. And I mean, other states I like this too. There is no, other states have implemented it for many, many years. You might see a dip, but I think it's too new in New Jersey to be dipping right now. Once we're many years in my opinion, like, for example, like Florida and North Carolina, they've had early voting for many, many years. So it's more steady, or it dips in a few counties once in a while. But New Jersey, since it's more new, it's still on a steady incline. So we still have a few more elections to get to like a quote new consistent voting pattern. We'll get there as other states have, so it's inevitable. But I think it's going to take a few more years. But I mean, as expected, as an advanced turnout overall has exceeded 2022 so far for the primary specifically.
I think you'd agree with me, Ryan, that one of the reasons why you saw the big increase in the eighth is because Hudson has been really slow adapters on vote by mail.
Yeah. They're not. There's let's see, for vote by mail for the eighth district in Hudson, it's 100 only compared. This is actually lower. It's only 150% of 2022, and then for the Democrats and 200%, which is pretty high for the Republicans in Hudson CD8. But and on a county level, it's not a humongous difference compared to 2022. But they are embracing early voting more. I haven't, believe it or not, I haven't compiled the county level stuff. I've only been doing the congressional level because we have all the races to talk about. But yeah, I think Hudson County has not embraced mail voting per se. They've embraced more machine voting, I would say.
All right. So I think moving on from the big picture of what things look at the state level, obviously primaries are very individualized contests where lots of different dynamics are happening per race. I feel like the first race to talk about is the one that sort of everybody was talking about, and that's Ryan's home district, Rob versus Ravi, Menendez versus Bala. I'm looking at the full results right now. There's still a few votes left to be counted, so this could still shift. But we've got Rob Menendez at 52%, Bala at 35 or 37.5%, and Kyle JC at 10%. Pretty healthy win for Menendez. I think this is something that was predictable going into election day. Not necessarily like an outcome that people would have said was certain to happen, but I think this was an outcome that people were sort of seeing how this would happen. So in your guys' opinion, what led to this result? You had this very expensive campaign. You had a lot of bad press around the Menendez name, and yet you end up with a fairly healthy victory for Menendez and for the party organization. How did that happen?
Well, one ingredient for sure is that Bala only came out of Hoboken 1,200 votes ahead. It was not a lopsided margin at all. And we talked about that last week. We talked about the fact that he had people slinging arrows at him, and we didn't know what kind of an impact that would have, but he didn't get any lift out of his hometown at all. We also talked about the fact, he did win Jersey City. He got votes out of Jersey City. But once you get through those two towns, where else do you go when all of Northern Hudson is delivering for Menendez, when Elizabeth is delivering for Menendez? It just, he didn't have runway past those two towns, it seems like.
Yeah, and I think you're talking about a really classic case of a candidate who figured out that his hair was on fire in enough time to put the fire out. And he got, despite all, the problems which were not his fault, he put together a pretty good campaign. He took it seriously. He became intense about raising money. He became strong on fundraising. In his ground operation, he put together a really good team. He went to he got Brad Lawrence doing the media. He had Michael Solomon. He had Brian Stack. Not just in Union City, but with a huge influence in the campaign. And he had Chris Bolich and Elizabeth completely committed. So Menendez did a lot of things right in order to make the case. He did an ad where he said, Bala's going to want to just talk about my father, but this isn't about my father. This is about what I've done in Congress. Rob Menendez succeeded in putting together, I think an outreach that said, don't visit the sins of the father on the son. And I think the community largely bought into that. They didn't hold him responsible, and he did what he didn't have a chance to do 2 years ago, which is he established his own independent relationship with his constituents and was able to run on his accomplishments. Bala, like you said, Mike, earlier, I mean, he had $2 million. He was exceptionally strong on fundraising, but he wasn't able to connect with voters, and he wasn't able to peel any town off. He didn't peel off Bayonne, or he didn't peel off North Bergen, or he wasn't able to go say I need the North and East wards of Newark with me. He just didn't have any success doing that. Rob did well. He had one of the ironies here is Rob's top political advisor was Michael Solomon, who spent 15 years as Bob Menendez's political advisor. Menendez, unwisely went in a different direction after his indictment, and that freed up Michael to go all in for Rob, even at the extent where it might have made the father feel uncomfortable. So, I think Rob ran a really good campaign, and he couldn't have run a really good campaign if he didn't get serious about it early and accept the fact that he was in trouble.
So there was an interesting line in the Jersey Journal's endorsement of Bala that was, I'm going to paraphrase here because I don't remember the exact wording, but basically, the editorial kind of spelled out the pros and cons of both Menendez and Bala. And then it concluded with saying that voters should vote for Bala to correct the wrongs that had been visited upon them in 2022, when Albio Sierras retired and Hudson Democrats just sort of unilaterally decided, okay, well, we like this U.S. senator's son who's never run for office before and holds one appointed position on the Port Authority. Everybody clear the way for him, and everybody did, and he won in a landslide. And he raised some money and he campaigned. I'm not saying that he didn't do anything, but it was deliberately made into a cakewalk for him. It was not the kind of thing where voters had to get to know him particularly well. It was not the kind of thing where he had to really win any kind of dogfight. And so the Jersey Journal said, correct that wrong. And I think in a kind of an ironic way, Rob Menendez did correct that wrong by winning on sort of his own merits, where now he actually, obviously he got major help from the party organization, and I think he would credit them with part of his victory. And that speaks to still how strong these party organizations are in New Jersey, and how any of these anti-establishment candidates will just always have to contend with that. But it's also, now his constituents will not really confuse him for his father anymore because he ran this race. Now people kind of know what he's doing in Washington. Now he has had to sort of define what he's about and what he's not about. So in that kind of weird way, this was his real first proper campaign. This is the campaign that made him a congressman, much more than the little coronation that happened in 2022 when no one was really paying that close of attention.
I agree with you.
He's got to realize too that he's got he's only at 52%.
That too.
I mean, Bala's number was a little lower because Kyle Jasey took some votes that I think in a two-way race, I think most of them would have gone to Bala. So he's not there yet. He's still got to keep his foot on the gas. This was a big win compared to where the guy in second place was. But it's when an incumbent is at 52% in a primary, it means their job's not over yet, and they can't rest on their laurels. At this moment,
it's one of the things about coming from a safe area for one party is that you don't always get tested early in your career. You don't. He hadn't had a tough race. In a way, he should be thanking Bala, because Bala is what caused him to get out there and figure out how to win.
I don't think he's thanking Bala, but I get you.
Yeah, okay, but fine. But I mean, he can now say he knows how to win. He figured out how to win, and he wouldn't have done that without the challenge. So that's a good thing, and it's something that's missing from a lot of politicians who come from safe districts and safe areas.
One other thing that I'll say about this race, is just sort of like an implicit dynamic in it, is that Menendez was Hispanic and Bala was not. And that is, a fundamentally important point in a race in a majority Hispanic district. This is a district that has been drawn for decades specifically to elect the Hispanic community sort of candidate of choice. That doesn't have to be a Hispanic candidate necessarily, but it usually is. It's been Bob Menendez, then Albier Series, then Rob Menendez. With Bob Menendez presumably leaving the Senate at the end of this year, Rob Menendez also is the only Latino representation that New Jersey is set to have. And so I don't know how many voters were thinking about that super consciously, where it's like, we must protect Rob Menendez for the sake of the Hispanic community. I don't know how much of that was necessarily an individualized motivation, but it was absolutely a factor in the race. You saw the Congressional Hispanic Caucus coming in with $500,000 in spending to boost Menendez and to make sure that New Jersey didn't go without any Latino representation. You saw lots of bilingual ads. I definitely saw more bilingual ads on the Menendez side than the Bala side. I imagine Bala did some, but it felt like less of an overwhelming focus of his campaign. So I think that will ultimately go down as part of this too. And you have to sort of wonder what the race might have looked like had the anti-establishment standard bearer also been Hispanic, whether that would have changed around some dynamics, whether that would have made certain voters less staunchly pro-Menendez, whether that would have just sort of generally changed the tenor of the race. So I guess, Ryan, I want to go to you partially to ask about voting numbers, but also partially to ask, as a resident of the 8th district, do you have any sort of on-the-ground thoughts on what you saw?
Well, personally, I'm going to miss all the flyers I got every day, but it was cool. I've never really voted in a race that millions of dollars would be poured into, but I see and hear about it and read about it all the time. So now I know what it's like as a voter. In terms of what I saw, you saw the sign on my tweet that went viral with that sign that just had Rob in small letters Menendez. And it was on every sign in Jersey City. So, as a voter perspective, I think they were definitely concerned that the race could be somewhat competitive. I think personally, I don't get too editorial, but I think Bala ran a campaign more on him not being a Menendez versus his accomplishments. But of course, he has his own accomplishments. I'm not going to just undermine that at all. I just think the campaign could have been, more high spirited than the flyers I've been getting. But I know his campaign wasn't really funding those flyers necessarily. In terms of actual data, though, so not my councilman, but Ward E councilman James Solomon tweeted that getting rid of the line led to progressive groundswell in Jersey City. So the 20 minutes before we went on the air, I quickly did a quick, somewhat inconclusive data analysis. And what I did was, I took the precinct file that Hudson County, this is Hudson County only. I took the precinct file that Hudson County posts, for the 8th Congressional District. And I mapped those precinct results to the 2018 Senate race with his father, Bob Menendez, and progressive challenger Lisa McCormick, because I figured that's somewhat the most similar past race. There is one caveat, though. Back in 2018, when the laws were so much different in Jersey, mail votes were not folded back into precinct results. So the precinct results in 2018 only reflect the election day vote. So what I did was I took the election day vote from each precinct from this election, and I compared it to the election day vote, which was the total vote back then in 2018, to the Senate race, and compared that, add up the wards from Jersey City and the other towns in Hudson County. So Solomon is correct that, there was a progressive groundswell in terms of the actual just election day vote, because to compare apples to apples, he mentions Ward C and D being, not as progressive as they once were. In terms of this primary, it actually was kind of true. Like in Ward C, let's see, Menendez won the election day vote in Ward C by 40%, where Bala won it by 16%. Same with Ward D, Menendez won it, won the election day vote specifically by 46%, but 25% Bala. But however, it stops at Jersey City and Hoboken. Bala Bala doesn't win the election day vote in any other city besides Jersey City and Hoboken, from what I've just learned. However, the margin was not as big per se. So, like in Union City, for example, Menendez won the election day vote by 83%. But this year in 2022, Bala lost it by 59%. I don't know if this was because of the line necessarily, or just because Bala was a more well-known, better liked candidate, Lisa McCormick. But in terms of progressive groundswell,
You would almost have to be if to be better liked than Lisa McCormick. But
right, yeah, I know. I mean, I've tried to compare it somewhat to the past of this is more progressive than it once was because of the county line. My point is James Solomon was really, I think he was overemphasizing getting rid of the county line because of a progressive groundswell. I know Lisa McCormick is not Ravi Bala, but it's the only somewhat similar past race to compare it to.
Yeah.
But I mean, like McCormick lost 83% in Union City, but Bala lost 59%. Same with like North Bergen. She lost 81%, but Bala lost 47%. I don't know if this is because of the line, but there was more progressive vote in this race.
And I think what you're going to see, in terms of organizations also is would you rather, and I'll ask this as a question of Micah, is would you rather have a progressive groundswell, or would you rather have Ryan Stack as a Pied Piper walking people to polls for a week before the election? You talk about a progressive groundswell. There was a groundswell in other places too. It was just based on organization.
Yeah. So with all due respect, I think that we've spent a lot of time talking about this, David, you and I privately, but a progressive groundswell could mean a couple hundred votes. Brian Stack in his town could mean a couple thousand votes. So it's a difference of magnitudes. And by the way, one is louder, one is making more noise, one is all over social media. Maybe they will grow into that, but that's not where they are in most places in this state.
I mean, clearly, like there definitely is. So I was just crunching some numbers while you guys were talking about Jersey City. So I'm looking at Jersey City Ward E, and then the parts of Ward F that are in the 8th district, and that kind of those two combined make up most of Jersey City's sort of downtown, which is like kind of the progressive hub of New Jersey. Like in terms of if an anti-machine candidate is going to do well anywhere, it's really going to be those neighborhoods. That's where James Solomon represents. He's Ward E. And that Ward E and half of Ward F voted for Bala 68 to 24%, 2,800 votes to 1,000 votes. So you're right that people sort of talk about these things differently, and I like the organization groundswell. No one really says that. It's sort of just the organization doing its job versus a progressive groundswell. And you've got these kind of differing standards. But at the same time, I think that you are getting to a point where downtown Jersey City can kind of claim a certain mantle of, no, we can genuinely deliver a large amount of votes for the progressive anti-machine candidates that are appealing to us. Like we can deliver Ravi Bala single-handedly 1,800 votes from our sort of 1/5 of a city. That's more than he got out of all of Hoboken in terms of margin. So I think as you look towards like the 2025 Jersey City mayoral race and council elections, and maybe a potential assembly primary in that district, I think that's something that you absolutely have to look out for.
Maybe
whether it's enough to win the 8th Congressional District or whether it's enough to win Hudson County countywide. Not really, not at this point, because there's too much of the rest of the county kind of counteracting.
It's interesting. Menendez didn't win any wards in Jersey City. He lives there. So his victory was credited on his neighbors.
Yeah, and he lost his own voting district as well. I checked that. He lost.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah,
like 20 points. I mean, 20 percentage points means like 10 votes in this case because they aren't casting a crazy number of votes. But
Philip and others talk, I think, convincingly about how you're going to have this donut around the rest of the Hudson organization, where those areas are of Jersey City are not really going to be machine susceptible, right? It may have to do with income, it may have to do with education level, it may have to do with a lot of things, but the areas where the machine is going to hold up are going to be the areas where they're still buying the machine message, and they're not sucked into this the progressive politics.
Yeah. All right, should we move on?
I'm going to look at. Can I just one
Go ahead,
last
Brett.
thing is
Yeah.
I think one of the things to look at in the future for Rob Menendez is he going to show some of the attributes of his father as it relates to local politics? Will there be any price to pay for Hoboken? I don't mean I don't mean Chris Christie style price to pay, but I mean Menendez style, which is does Rob Menendez have to go into Hoboken now and maybe put a body out on the tarmac to show that he is serious about I'm your congressman, I'm going to be here for a while, and don't think about challenging me in the future.
But will he be able to do that? Because the areas where there are people who he'd probably most like to oust from office are also the areas where he did worse to begin with. So does Rob Menendez coming into Ward 3 Hoboken council race or whatever, does that actually benefit the person who he's coming in for? I don't know. He probably lost that ward. I haven't done the specific ward calculations. But these sort of progressive areas of Jersey City and Hoboken where there were people that were aligned against him, what can he do about that if the voters have just proven that they're actually not aligned with him? So should we move on to the other big House Democratic primary? I think that there will be less to say here because in the end, it was something of a sleepy result, even though it was a very spirited campaign that led up to it. But so in Andy Kim's House seat down in Burlington, Monmouth, and Mercer counties, you had Herb Conaway. Let me get up those results so I can tell you the updated numbers. He is currently sitting at exactly 49.5% of the vote. So he hasn't quite reached the majority threshold. And then you got Carol Murphy, fellow member of the assembly, at 25%. Joe Cohn, Sarah Schoengood, Brian Schieper, all down in the lower digits. I feel like all of us were somewhat predicting this outcome beforehand. There were a lot of indicators that were pointing towards a Conaway victory. Did you guys think that it was going to be this strong? I mean, a 25-point victory is nothing to sneeze at all.
No, I think we can look at we can see why it happened, right? We can see that it was the money. We can see that it was the campaigning, it was the advertising, it was the three organizations. We know that the organizations were able to figure it out. We talked about that in District 8. The same thing is true here. But I don't know if we knew that all of those things would have added up to a 2-to-1, 2-to-1 margin.
Yeah, and I think what you had in the 3rd district is two good candidates, solid people. I mean, they were running mates, and Conaway was able to figure out the money part better. And money is where it all comes from. Money gives you the ability to be up on the air, to be in the mailboxes, to put up the billboards that he had. And gave him an early start, and this was a race where it was very much about you can't run a campaign if you can't reach the voters, and this wasn't a rejection of Carol Murphy. It was that Conaway was able to put that together, and he's never been a huge fundraiser because he hasn't had to, but he put together he had this network of doctors, and he was able to go to doctors up and down the state. If you look at his FEC reports, and it's MD, 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 and he said, all right, I haven't asked you in the past, but now I need it. Now's the time where I need that check. And they responded, and he had the National Science PAC doing a substantial independent expenditure. And the usual suspects within the state, they were just they didn't know what to do because these were both people that they liked, and one of them was still going to be in the assembly. and we're all everybody thinks that Congress is a promotion, except for the state lobbyists that are more concerned about who's going to be left when the whole thing's over. They all sort of sat this out. That kind of local labor unions didn't play big here, and this was just Herb Conaway's time, and he's been there for a long time, and he's won by he's been a proven vote getter. Nobody disliked either of them, but they knew Herb, and he got off to a good start before the lines were eliminated, and I think it's just his time, and sometimes that's the case in politics.
I thought
Sorry, go ahead.
I thought he had a really effective answer on let's send another woman to Congress, right? And at first he was like, well, I don't really like that kind of identity politics, right? He tried to be a little sheepish about it. And he's like, no, how about we send the first black doctor to Congress? And that was a really effective counter. And I don't think you heard very much more about, can we send another woman to Congress after that?
What I'll quickly say on just to David's point about fundraising, I think that you sort of saw how the county organizations and the awarding of the lines can still have downstream effects even when the line itself doesn't appear on the ballot. Because you had that first fundraising quarter where Conaway and Murphy were in the race at the last quarter of 2023. And they fundraised pretty terribly, to be totally honest. I mean, they were both in the race for a little while, and they came out of a full fundraising quarter with like $40,000 each for a congressional campaign. Like that's not enough to do much of anything. But then you sort of had in the winter and early spring, you had Conaway's sort of renaissance where he started to win all these county lines, and he was winning all of them in landslides too. I mean, you went to them, and that first Monmouth one was something like 80 votes to 10. I don't remember the precise breakdown, but it was something that lopsided. And then that kind of creates a permission structure where, these donors who might otherwise not want to get involved are sort of like, well, I mean, it's clearly tilting in one way here. And these outside groups, I think that there's a reason why 314 Action, the Science PAC, and then Vote Vets, which supports veterans like Conaway is, came into his aid, whereas Emily's List didn't. It's because these early factors in the race put him on, he had the momentum that would make it so that those investments would be meaningful. Whereas Carol Murphy wasn't able to catch that same wave of momentum. She wasn't able to get that sort of early catch of party support. And then from then on, it became much more of a risky bet to invest in her at all. And everyone just sort of decided not to. And I think that even though the ballots were all even in the end, and all of the candidates appeared the same. And in fact, in Burlington County, I think Carol Murphy was at the top and Herb Conaway was at the bottom. The early dynamics that were set in place during those county conventions and during those sort of early endorsement seasons, I think is what ended up winning this for Conaway. It's what put him on this path.
I think that's a very fair point. And to some extent, we talked about this last week, and we've talked about it for the pieces that you wrote on the race, which is that we thought that the end of the line could be the great reset for Carol Murphy. We thought that could breathe new potential into her race. Well, it turned out that she wasn't able to capitalize on that to turn around the fundamental narrative that had set in on that race to begin with. So I think you're right.
And I think it's also interesting. 75% of the votes were cast in support of establishment candidates who came out of the organization. It's just how they broke, but this was still 75%. You had, Joe Cohn got a respectable 12%. He impressed a lot of people. Even people on both sides. They all seemed to come out of this campaign. They all liked Joe Cohn. They thought he raised, good ideas. Something that Joey and I talked about is here was a guy who's like a little frustrated that there were a lot of important issues that didn't get addressed just because of the way this campaign was set up. But this was not a progressive groundswell. This was not a grassroots thing. This was by a 3-1 margin. Voters voted for one of the people for candidates that they knew.
You
And I
you raised
Go
a
ahead.
really interesting point just then, which is you could be a progressive and you could say, okay, well, for a while we're going to continue to be dominated by organization types, right? Because that's just who's come up. That's our politics right now are still all organization types because they all came up through the organization. You could say, well, over time that will change, right? Over time we'll have a chance to break other people in other ways. But it also is a prescription to the organizations, which is to do what they're really good at in Hudson County, which is as people come up as renegades, you incorporate them into the organization, and the organization becomes them. So it's a future path both for the renegades and for the regulars. You got to figure out what to do with these new breeds of politicians as they come up, maybe not through the system.
Yeah, and I mean, like anecdotally, I heard from a couple of people, they saw Brian Schieper on, who appeared out of nowhere, didn't know anybody, wasn't party to any of this, just decided he wanted to run for Congress, figured out how to do it, got his petitions, and he didn't do great. He got 3% of the vote in a huge congressional district, but I had a couple of people say, wow, I hope he sticks with it. He should run for council in Medford because there's a talent there. There was something there that they saw. I wouldn't, the reality is Herb Conaway is going to be in Congress for a while. This seat's going to remain Democratic into the 2040s. But, so there may not be another opportunity. But, a guy like Joe Cohn, people look at him and say, here's a smart, talented guy. And there's a place in government for smart people. Some would say that we should have more smart people than we do now. But
all the third candidate's got to do, Sarah Schoengood, she's just got to move. She of the three of them, she's in a solid Republican town. I think that some people were kind of impressed by her too. She actually, I was looking at the results. She came in second she didn't come in second. She came in third in Mercer County. She came in second at the Mercer County Convention back in the spring. But she is unfortunately from the solid red town of Manalapan. So she needs to buy a new house and then she can start her new political career.
I would say in terms of numbers, but that's my part. Democrats had a much better night in the district than Republicans. I mean, the current turnout right now, we're looking at 124% of 2022 for the Democrats and only 106% of 2022 for the Republicans. So turnout compared to the last federal election was better for Democrats than Republicans. But for advanced voting, though, believe it or not, both parties were at 118% of 2022. So I guess Democrats had somewhat of a bigger spike of election day vote in the district, interestingly.
And I guess that's something we should also mention the Republican primary in this district. This is not a district that people sort of expect to be one of the marquee races of November, but it is also a seat that was competitive in its earlier iteration when Andy Kim flipped it from Republicans in 2018. It was really trying to be more Democratic, but the 2022 race was still sort of a live one. You had the Republican primary won by Rajesh Mohan. And I think that this primary is maybe the most interesting test case in terms of the line's impact of any race in the state, where you had a weird situation where the Republican line was kept intact statewide by the federal court order, but Burlington County Clerk Joanne Schwartz said, I actually don't think Republicans should have a line. I'd rather just design one type of ballot. So in the majority of this district, Republicans didn't have a line either. And you actually saw the effect of that really, really starkly, where Mohan is at 51% of the vote in Mercer County and 52% of the vote in Monmouth County, but at only 30% of the vote in Burlington County. He's trailing Shirley Maya Cusick in Burlington County 34-30. It seems like, and this is sort of what anti-line people have been saying for a while. And this is a super, super clear case of their argument that now they can go to a judge in the future and maybe bring this up as piece of evidence number one in terms of why the line should be struck down. You can see that voters in Mercer and Monmouth County, looking at candidates who didn't raise a lot of money and who they probably never heard from, they were provided a really clear roadmap for who to vote for. Like, oh, okay, this is my organization's column. I like my local councilman, and this is the Senate candidate, and then here is Rajesh Mohan. Okay, sounds good. Mm-hmm. And then Burlington County, they were looking at 4 candidates because there were also 2 other candidates running. They were looking at 4 candidates they probably never heard of, and they just sort of reacted like, whoa, I don't know. And you ended up with this much more scattered result.
Yeah, this is you're right, Joey. This is for Republicans the ghost of Christmas future. This is what it's going to look like, and I was looking at the Burlington Senate numbers. Now, Burlington had given Curtis Basho the line, and in that Senate primary, it broke out exactly the way the lines did. Serrano Glasner won, her county's big. Basho run his county's big. Without the line, this was a 7-point spread. Basho only won by, I shouldn't say only because seven's not bad, but he won Burlington by 7 points with the organization in support. And Ryan, maybe tell me if I'm wrong, but there wasn't another line county in the state that came anywhere near those. If you had the line, you were winning it by healthy double digits. And in this particular case, and you go to Atlantic County, that's a little closer to Cape May. That's there was a little bit more going on, and Basho won that big even without a line there. But Burlington County is where everything was at, and Maya Cusack did okay. I shouldn't say okay. In the Burlington part of it, she did very well, but so did two other candidates who were completely unknown and not really relevant to the race, but they were both above double digits. You didn't have that 3% candidate in Burlington. So I think Joey, you're right. This is as we go into 25 for a gubernatorial primary, for legislative primaries. This is what it's going to look like for them, and we don't have that example in the Senate race on the Democratic side because that race was over before it had a chance to really go to the voters. So Burlington Republicans in Congress and in the U.S. Senate, this is sort of the roadmap of what Bill Spadea and Jack Ciattarelli and John Bramnick and Ed Durr are going to need to look at is where that counties can be divided, and maybe we'll talk more about the 25 at some point, but the lesson when you have a field of more than two candidates is if you come in second in 21 counties, you're probably going to win the primary, and there are pockets of votes to be had for everybody in every county.
So since you brought up the Senate primary, I'll just sort of pose the counterfactual. In a universe where Zahid Qureshi did not issue his sort of follow-up order saying, oh, my original opinion actually doesn't apply to Republicans because no Republicans were involved in the preliminary injunction. In a world where the Republican line gets struck down too, is Curtis Bashaw still the Republican U.S. Senate nominee right now?
I don't know. Without lines, if we're being counterfactual, we have to also include, what would it have looked like for Serrano Glasner financially? The bottom line is she didn't have enough money to make her Donald Trump's endorsement of her candidacy into a factor. I don't know if the elimination of the lines in the Republican primary would have spurred her fundraising or not. Basho would have still had the same amount of money. And, one of the things you saw in this race is conservative Republicans throughout the state, not everywhere, but decent pockets of it. A guy like Senator Mike Testa, considerably more conservative than Curtis Basho, but he was Basho's campaign chairman. So Alex Wilkes is his campaign manager. Not exactly a moderate. She's pretty conservative. But you found people on the Republican side who were really they found Curtis Basho acceptable. To answer your question, I don't know if Christine Serrano Glasser had been able to raise another, $400,000-$500,000, and was actually up on the air, real TV with the Trump commercial, maybe that would have made a difference, because she only lost by 7 points. But remember, she wouldn't have won Bergen County by as much as she did. She wouldn't, may not have won Morris County.
Yeah.
So,
I will make an imperfect prediction. I want to bounce something off of you guys to ask for your thoughts on it. Given what we saw on the Democratic side, which is different beasts, different animals, right? But given that the non-lines held, right? I wonder if we could infer that maybe the Republican non-lines would have held as well. If the county organizations and their endorsements and their work would have still been the decisive factor that we think that they were on the Democratic side. And to that end,
Gilmore's an ocean wood.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. And to that end, well, let me ask that one first, then I have a follow-up. Go ahead. I'm sorry. You think?
No, I mean, I think yes. I mean, but there are little pockets here throughout the state where, I mean, statewide, 15% of Republicans voted for two candidates that they couldn't possibly have ever heard of. Justin Murphy and Albert Harshua. And I don't know how to read that. I don't know what that means, other than there's just 15% that will fool you. Somebody suggested to me jokingly that there's just a lot of Republicans who like to vote for somebody named Murphy, and that's probably not really true. But you don't have many strong Republican organizations in the state, and so what do you have? You have Ocean, you have Atlantic, you have Monmouth, right. Cumberland's a good organization, but it's about the size of South Brunswick.
Yeah.
You've got Hunterdon, Warren, Sussex, Morris. It's a significant number, but it's not the same as Hudson, Bergen, Passaic, Middlesex, Union, Camden. You're just talking about bigger percentages.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joey.
Well, that was going to be sort of my point as well, is that I think that you would have, on the whole, seen a similar map to the one that we're seeing now, where generally the 14 pro Bashaw counties would still vote for Bashaw, and generally the 7 pro Serrano-Glassner counties would vote for Serrano-Glassner. But then, you look at a county like Mercer County, where Republicans, I don't think, hold a single local seat at any level in the county. So that's not a county organization that is, it's got some devoted people working for it, but it's not something that can really move a whole bunch of votes. Bashaw is ahead in Mercer County 56-24. Would that same result have happened if voters weren't directly guided by their ballots? I cannot imagine it would have. I can't imagine that organization would be capable of pulling out that kind of result if the ballots weren't helping them along. And so I think you'd see a lot of counties being more like Burlington, where it's Bashaw 35, Serrano-Glassner 30, where, the organization is holding, but not by that much. And I think in that scenario where you're sort of softening those Bashaw margins in a lot of counties, I have to think that the Senate primary would be a little bit of a coin toss, because there would be just enough people sort of softening on the edges and maybe figuring out this Trump endorsement and stuff like that, even with this status quo in place, the race was still kind of close. 7 points is not that huge of a victory margin. You have to think that might start to flip things.
I think really quick. I think somewhat. I mean, maybe it's not as significant as you guys would agree, but I think ballot slogan matters too. At least when I was voting.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah. I mean, at least when I was voting, voters. I mean, I don't think voters are stupid. I think when they see the Republican/Democratic county committee right on the slogan for the presidential race and Senate race, and then down the ballot, they see the same slogan. I think they can figure out that they're the establishment candidate. At least that's what I was thinking. That's my point of view.
Yeah.
When I was voting,
in the absence of a line, they were looking for that in many cases. Who's the endorsed candidate? Yeah.
like I have friends who who are Democrats, and they were like they figured it out, like they weren't, even though there was no line, they figured out who was the establishment candidate. I hate saying that word, but it's the most common word.
No, I think it mattered too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, so I think ballot slogan matters. I'm picturing an alternate universe where there's no ballot slogan either, like every other state. So yeah, I think ballot slogan, I think would save candidates in a world where the line is gone for the Republicans everywhere. Because even they might not campaign, like you see signs saying, "Oh, vote column A, column B, yada yada." But I think maybe in an alternate universe, they're gonna have saying they're gonna say vote for this slogan instead of vote for this column.
And then there are two strategies that you can kind of have to combat that. Either you have, and Serrano Glasner and Bashaw kind of took opposite tacks on this in the counties where they didn't have the line. For Serrano Glasner's strategy was to sort of do the messaging slogan, where if you're not going to have the official party slogan, you're going to sort of try to convey what you're about. So in the counties where she didn't have the line, she was America First Conservative. So she was trying to kind of signal my opponent may have the Ocean GOP support or whatever, but she couldn't say endorsed by Trump yet. That wasn't true yet. But, I'm the true America First patriot here. And then Bashaw did the other sort of classic strategy, which is come up with a slogan that's kind of like the organization slogan. In the counties where he didn't have the endorsement, he had things like, let me find one of them. Hunterdon County Conservative Republican. Kind of looks similar to what the organization is. I mean, you're saying conservative, you're kind of signaling that a little bit. But and some people will go even more specific, where they'll, the proper organization slogan will be the Essex County Democratic Inc. or whatever. And then the someone will do like Essex Democratic Party or something. Technically a different slogan, and it's not copyrighted or whatever the term would be by the party, so they can use it. And when there's lines on the ballot, it's easy for voters to tell, well, obviously that's not actually the organization. This is the organization right here. In a line for universe, those kinds of slogans the closer they get, the more powerful they might become, because people genuinely just miss that, that's a Democrat instead of Democratic or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And even, maybe as a glimpse to the future too, you're looking at, I just looked up Ocean County in the 2020 Senate primary, and Hirsch Singh, who had the line in Ocean County, won 74% of the vote, and Bashaw did well in Ocean, but he was at 63. That 11-point swing, and I mean, even in the most objective possible scenario, Curtis Bashaw is an extraordinarily better candidate than Hirsch Singh. So what happened there? It means maybe that 11% of Ocean County primary voters were affected by that slogan, that America First slogan. That
maybe or the Trump endorsement, which I mean that's a pretty Trump area.
But if they didn't know about the Trump endorsement,
no, I know, but I think
everywhere, how did they suddenly know?
But
about
all people have to
Ocean
do to
County?
find out about an endorsement is just Google Christine Serrano Glasner, and those are going to be the first stories that come up. Clearly, not every voter did that, because a lot of voters went to the ballot booth and voted for Curtis Bashaw, despite being pro-Trump and maybe being swayed by a Trump endorsement if they'd known about it. But I mean, I think that explains why there's still a decent Serrano Glasner vote in a lot of these counties, even though she wasn't spending much money, even though she might have never reached those voters, is because plenty of voters do their own research. And the main story that existed about this race for the month leading up to it was Donald Trump endorses Serrano Glasner. I'm sure that counted for something.
And the story on election night, Donald Trump's candidate loses.
Right.
And I mean, this was really the first major, a statewide race where the Trump endorsement didn't put somebody over. It's really about money. I mean, Micah, I'll ask you, I don't want to go too long on it, but this is a question for old guys like us, because I have a feeling Joey and Ryan don't even know about this, but there was a time where every gubernatorial candidate got a statement on the ballot.
Right, I remember.
500-word statement. At a time where local media is not what it used to be, and there's not really a lot of coverage of these elections so that voters can make their own decision beyond what they're being seeing in paid messaging. Is there an argument to be made that it would be good for democracy if sample ballots included 500 word statements from most candidates?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of opposite the way we have gone, but California has, I mean, famously has, the book because of all their ballot questions, but they have explanations. They have good explanations that are not just written by, lawyers. They're not just legal documents. Yeah, I think it would be helpful in an age where I tell this story a lot, so if I have told it before, stop me. But one of the deans at my school was getting ready to vote in her local election, and this is a pretty well informed person generally, and she really had a hard time finding anything out about her local candidates. And she came to me, and we wound up scouring first for local news, didn't find anything, then through websites for the campaigns, didn't find anything, then we wound up going to personal social media pages and trying to glean positions from that. So I think it would be helpful. I think voter guides would be helpful. We have all those resources, but actually putting that kind of information on the sample ballot would be helpful in an age where it is harder and harder to find that information in some cases. For a statewide candidate, you're going to find it, but for a local candidate, you won't find that stuff.
Colorado also has, I think it's mandated by law to have voter guides in Colorado as well. But they also have, they're a big ballot measure state because they have the initiative referendum process, which we don't have, but yeah.
Right.
Also, David, I want to bring up really quick. You said the point about you said 15% Republicans didn't vote for either Bashar or Christine Serrano Glassner. And I don't know if this is probably oversimplifying it, but I have two friends in Ocean County, Toms River specifically, that where the county line was column A last year in 2023, but this year was column B. And my two friends, they voted for Justin Murphy because he was in column A, thinking he was the endorsed candidate. I was like, no, it's column B this year. It's not column A. So where the column line can be could have a very small effect on the outcome of the race too. But that's also my two friends who were not the most informed voter clearly, but yeah, no, like it can cause confusion because if they thought the line was this column last year, it changes. So it's another con of this whole story.
And Brian, I think you're free to say that because if they're voting based on thinking it's column A, they're not watching us tonight.
Right?
They don't know that you've just ripped them apart. So that's
safe.
Right. They're not watching this now.
That kind of story does make me wonder, sort of like if someone, because the whole party argument for the county line is that it provides this sort of ease of understanding for voters. I mean, what are your friends going to do in a non-county line environment when they're looking at an entire ballot that doesn't tell them?
Right, they're going to ask me
who to vote for.
Yeah, they're going to ask me who to vote for, and I'm not going to.
Okay.
Because I hate when people do that. But I mean, I guess I think. I'm not going to say that's why 50% Republicans voted for those two candidates because of the line placement, but 2 votes. I mean, it was 2 votes who thought they were voting for Bashar in that case, but they meant to vote for the establishment candidate, but they didn't because of the placement of the line. So it can bite them in the butt later.
Right. I think that part of the reason, going back to the 8th district quickly, I think that Kyle Jacey sort of exceeded our expectations a little bit. He ended up with like 11% of the vote. Yeah. I think that part of the reason for that is that he was listed first on the ballot in all 3 counties. Just by total coincidence, they all got the same ballot draw, and he was listed first. And Mo Butler, a Democratic operative, pointed this out on a different live stream with me yesterday morning, and I thought it was a really insightful point. He noted that the way that Essex County specifically designed its ballots, it was sort of, it almost replicated the line where
horizontally,
all of the offices were like listed in columns, and then you ended up with this visual effect where it kind of looked like the list of candidates at the top who just happened to get the top ballot position for each race were sort of the line, even though it was sort of a mix of whether that person was really backed by the party or not. So
I mean, I didn't notice it, Joey. Did you notice it right away? I feel like you have to really notice that. The average voter wouldn't notice that if I didn't notice it, in my opinion. I don't know.
Well, but the results bear out that it might have had some effect because I'm looking at the results. So in Hudson County, Kyle Jacey is at 9%. In Union County, he's at 14%. In Essex County, so in Newark, he's at 21%. He's almost in second place ahead of Bala. So there's actual evidence that I think some voters were genuinely a bit perplexed by that and just went.
How much of that do you think it's possible? I mean, you think back to the Obama 2004 Senate primary in Illinois, where the state senator was the he was the third candidate in that race. He was he started out, he was in third place, and he wound up surging because the other two were beating the crap out of each other. And when you go negative, you're taking some points away from your own campaign as well as the other guys. And it was the fact that voters got turned off by both of them that allowed Obama to sort of emerge as the guy. Do you think some of the JC votes were, well, I don't like Menendez and I don't like Bala because I've seen all these ads and so I'll vote for this guy I've never heard of because nobody said anything bad about him. Could that have meant a few points for Kyle JC?
I would think so. As a voter in the 8th district, I mean, they're both not perfect. So, and as someone like me who's been getting nasty messages and flyers for weeks on end, and as a voter, you could be of it and you just vote for the third candidate. I think there was a third candidate spoiler, absolutely. Both of them are not angels, to be honest. So, yeah, I think it was just a third candidate. I'm sick of this kind of vote effort.
I will vote for whoever sends me the fewest mailers. Get this stuff out of my mailbox.
Yeah,
I wondered the same thing about Patricia Campos Medina. She got 16%. That's a very respectable number, I think.
That's what she said
in a race
over and over and over. Yeah.
What's that?
That's what she kept saying.
Yeah.
It's
a number. It exceeded my expectations.
She got a pretty hefty share in a couple of key counties. I'm going to do like a town breakdown at some point, maybe next week when I get all the data in. But I mean, just looking Middlesex County, she's got 30% of the vote. Hudson County, she and Larry Ham are combining for like a third of the vote. It's nothing to sneeze at. It's not anything that really takes away from Andy Kim's victory. And that's something we barely mentioned. Had Tammy Murphy remained in the race, we would have spent the first full hour talking about whatever the results of that were. Instead, she got out and we sort of all are treating it as an afterthought that, Andy Kim's probably going to be a U.S. Senator. Oh, good for him. Yay. But I mean,
it's a decent amount of money in her defense, but yeah.
75% is a great number for Andy. We talked about this last week, and you threw out the 60% number would be the number that we would say if he got under that, he would be in trouble. 75%, fantastic number for him. Having said that, I think two things are possible. One is that I think she made a strong impression in a number of counties. I have a cousin who's a county committee person in Hunterdon who said that she lit up the room, that she was great in Hunterdon, and that she really had a warm feeling toward her. And she didn't just come around then. She had been around before. So there was that. And then I wonder, when I hear about Middlesex, the 30%, which I'd seen, is that somehow a little tiny bit of backlash against driving Tammy Murphy out of the race, where some organization types say, well, we're looking for alternative to Andy there?
Well, in Camden County, and Andy's number in Camden County was very good, and it should be, because he's been up on Philly TV, in expensive campaigns, every other year for the last 6 years. But his name wasn't on any of the mail. It wasn't on the walking pieces. So the organization, some of these organizations weren't promoting him.
And remember, David, because this is one that progressives want to forget this part. He said, "I'm not running with you in Camden." He said, "I'm not running."
That's right. That's right.
So, yeah. So they proceeded without him. Yeah. I mean, I'm not looking for blame, but he said, "I'm not running with you."
But it's 75 is, 75% in 2024 for a new guy who, by the way, really didn't spend a whole lot of money on TV and everything to become known. He became he became sort of a media sensation for informed voters, but 75% is only 10 points less than Cory Booker got as a 7-year incumbent in 2020 in a primary. There's always going to
against
be
one of the same guys.
against
Right.
Larry Ham. So
Mhm.
Larry Ham got what 9-10% this time,
9.
and he got 15 the last time. So there's always for every two of Ryan Dubicki's friends who want to vote for the establishment candidate, there's always there's always 3/4 of a friend who is never going to vote for the established candidate, no matter who they are. They're just going to go in there and vote against whoever it is because they don't like anybody in politics. They vote, but they don't like anybody in politics. So there's no way you can look at individual numbers in counties and towns, but there's no way of saying that 75% of the vote in a primary spending relatively few dollars, compared to what it's going to cost somebody to win a gubernatorial nomination next year. Andy Kim, his cost per vote is going to wind up being extraordinarily less than what we've seen in past years.
Yeah, and I think part of that, I mean, you're sort of talking about that there's the 3/4 of a friend. I'm sorry to that friend for losing whatever body parts you lost. Who will not vote for the establishment candidate under any circumstances. The kind of ironic thing is that friend might have still voted for Andy Kim, because Andy Kim is he gets to be a little bit of all things to all people. He's got the party support everywhere. The parties weren't necessarily pushing for him in most places. There were a couple counties where they were. I mean, like Burlington Democrats and Ocean Democrats were perfectly happy to be like, we love Andy Kim. We've always loved him. Go vote for him. But, most counties were still like, well, whatever. But I think that, for people looking for the organization-backed candidate who are looking for the slogan, what have you, he was that. But for the people who remember him as the guy who took down Tammy Murphy and beat the machines, he was also that. And for someone looking for the most moderate Democrat in the race, he was objectively that. He is more moderate than his opponents. But for progressives who want to vote for, a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus who's sort of allied with them on a lot of key issues, he's also that. So I think that's how you get to a vote percentage like 75% as a non-incumbent, having spent very little money, is you can appeal to almost every Democratic voter as basically the thing that they want to see, and it's truthful kind of regardless of the circumstances.
And
The first lady said when
fine.
she got out of the race that she didn't want to do what she had to do to win, which is to tear Andy Kim apart. She cited that as feeling uncomfortable with having to run that kind of a campaign. It's not what she wanted to do. So the result is nobody tore Andy Kim apart. He got 300 close to 375,000 votes, and nobody went negative on him, in anywhere near a substantial way. So here's a guy, who, you look at that compared to Booker in the 13 special primary when he ran against Pallone and Rush Holt, two sitting congressmen, and Sheila Oliver, who was the assembly speaker. It was a powerful roster of 4 candidates running for a open U.S. Senate seat, and Booker's numbers were not at 75 because he had significant opponents, but he also had Democrats trying to tear him down a little bit and going negative on him. So Kim, this has just been like the perfect storm for Andy Kim. He just he and not accidental. It's not like it just happened. He seized the moment. He got in the race the day after the indictment. He moved. He sort of captured the progressives. Andy Kim's not as progressives go in American politics. He's not as he's not a far left guy, but he took on some of these issues like the line where that was to the activists a really important cause that brought him a lot of loyalty, and the media loved him. It was in some cases a love fest for him. I remember he did a press gaggle after his New Jersey Globe debate with Tammy Murphy. Media were fawning over him, but he's this, and I say it a lot. This is a nice guy. There is no doubt about it. And people, on the Murphy side, they won't like that. But this is a nice guy. But when he needs to play hardball, he is willing and he's good at it. And he's not afraid to swing at pitches. He's, and I think all of that played into these numbers. But they're not real numbers in the sense that this was not this was not even on money, and this was not even on exposure, and Andy Kim, you talked about slogans, and I'll stop with this. With the exception of Camden County, he had the same he didn't run with the organizations, but he used their slogan in all of these counties, and he appeared to be the organization candidate. So he had the best of both worlds.
Do you guys have? Why do you guys think he is below 60% in Passaic County? You guys might know the answer to that. Is there some editorial reason?
Yeah, I mean,
my suspicion when I dive into the numbers is that Campos Medina just did very well in heavily Hispanic areas.
Yeah,
the three counties where she's doing best are Middlesex, I believe, are Middlesex, Hudson, and Passaic. All three of which have both large Hispanic populations and specifically some urban centers that are like almost exclusively Hispanic. And in Perth Amboy specifically, she got involved in local politics and had a former mayor supporting her. So, I mean, we'll see when I do the number breakdown on all of these things, but I would not be surprised to see Campos Medina winning like Perth Amboy and perhaps coming close to winning, say, Patterson or Passaic. And I think that was a key argument for her campaign. Was this has been a seat that was been represented by a Latino for 18 years. Bob Menendez's rise to the U.S. Senate was really, really important for the New Jersey Hispanic community. I mean, that's a huge breakthrough for them to first get a man in Congress and then get a man in the U.S. Senate. And they're losing that now. They're still going to have Rob Menendez in the House, but there will no longer be a member of New Jersey's Latino community sort of pushing that issue in the U.S. Senate. And I can imagine that regardless of any other factors in the race, the simple fact of Patricia Campos Medina's message and identity was important to some voters. And I think that the specific counties where she did best kind of bear that argument out of it.
So in Passaic, we've talked about this before, so many voters have not been voting the last couple of elections. Turnout's been so off. And they really needed to crank them out this time because they needed to win against Speziale. And so you have a bunch of voters who probably are pretty low information. They don't have they didn't know Andy Kim. They may not have known her, but they had to choose, right? And they were choosing without a line this time. So the name may have mattered more to them, right? Seeing a Latino name may have mattered more to them without the organization line. Without the benefit of other information, not knowing who Andy Kim was, right? Those may have added up to that choice where more voters who are more casual voters who didn't have a lot more information relied on the names that they thought were closer to theirs.
Yeah, and you look at Middlesex, where I'm looking at the number now because I don't remember. He got 59% of the vote in Middlesex, and Middlesex has probably, if Middlesex and Bergen, I would say maybe the largest Asian American populations in the state, but it may be that this is what people have been saying for a while. Middlesex is South Asian in that that didn't necessarily transfer either, but I would have thought that Kim would have done a little bit better in Middlesex for that reason, but we'll see. We'll see where Joey's town by towns break out.
So I just did some very, very quick calculations. I just downloaded some spreadsheet from Middlesex just to run a couple of towns. I was checking Perth Amboy and Carteret, both of which have big Hispanic populations. Andy Kim won both, but he won Carteret 357 votes to 348. And then Perth Amboy, he won, I think I'm doing my math here right. I did it really quick. 1,588 to 1,506. So both were really close. So I imagine when I get into the weeds on looking at a lot of these towns, that pattern might repeat where a lot of the weakness is coming from. I actually should check because another, okay, Kim is doing all right in Cumberland County, although Campos Medina also has a significant portion of the vote in Cumberland County, just another county that has a big Latino population. Whatever, this is something that we'll see as we keep on diving into this, but it's still an interesting point to note. I think that at this point, I think we should maybe try to wrap up by 10. I know that's a little bit blasphemy on these live streams to actually have a set endpoint instead of just going on into the ether endlessly. But sort of with this last half hour, I think we've covered the races that were on people's minds the absolute most. I'll give you guys free reign. Throw out other races that there's one in Passaic County that we haven't brought up yet that I think we're absolutely going to talk about. But throw out other races that you were sort of interested in on election night, and interested in post-election night as you sort of seen these results come in and wondered what caused them.
Well, go ahead, Micah. You go first.
You go ahead. This is very local, so you go ahead.
Yeah, so let's talk about Passaic County because there's a lot of people, myself included, who thought the edge might be to Spezial in the sheriff's race. I didn't know where the commissioner races were going to go, but I thought Spezial had an edge there. A lot of people surprised, not that just that Adamo won, but it was not a tight race. And I think what you're seeing here is a really good example of what we started talking about earlier. This became high noon for the Passaic County Democratic Organization, because almost instantly, and by the way, there were people who thought that Spezial was going to win off the line before this line was even struck down. He started with $500,000 in the bank from his old campaign fund. He had some name ID. Tom Adamo, who won, nobody. His father was a Republican freeholder, decades ago. That's it's maybe some residual in Wayne, but not really much more. What happened here is the organization looked at it and said, wow, Spezial wins, takes the sheriff's office from us, and what if he brings his 3 commissioners along with him, one of whom was the son of a sitting county commissioner? And suddenly you're looking at overnight going from a 6-1 Democratic majority that they controlled this courthouse for 2 decades, and they could have all been gone. They could have all been, you'd have pink slips all through the county. Spezial was not a newcomer. He knew he was putting in everywhere. He was on the verge of taking over Passaic County from the organization. And they looked at it and they said, well, we don't have the line, and we got, the strongest possible off-the-line opponent. So they did something that, we've all been talking about for a while, which is they actually ran a campaign. Mm-hmm. They didn't rest on their laurels and say, don't worry about it. The line will carry us. Everything will be fine. They got serious. They figured out what they needed to do. They did things differently than they've been doing. They organized in every town. They took vote by mail seriously. They went negative on Spezial. Curry's been stockpiling money for a rainy day for years, and people look at this tremendous bank balance, that just keeps growing gradually each year because every year he's bringing in more than he spends. He was saving it for a rainy day, and this was Hurricane Jerry about to come in here, and this is exactly what we were talking about at the lead-in. This this is organizations saying, okay, we can't win the way we've always won
Mm-hmm.
before, so we got to figure out a new way to win this election.
We got to do
And
it
they
the
did,
old-fashioned way.
you know, and they, you know, this team, you know, Keith Furlong and Sean Darcy and Ed Farmer, and that, you know, and they got their establishment people. You know, Pasquale has had sort of a rocky relationship with some of these people, but he was on board, and you know, and you know, that's how they won. And you know, quite frankly, I'll admit it. I was going to bet on Jerry Speciale on this one. I thought he was going to win, and I'm surprised that he didn't. And it is entirely because an old entrenched organization reinvented itself on the spot and took it seriously, and they ran scared and they ran serious, and they both ran really good campaigns. But this is where you have the organization with all the people on the ground and all the tentacles, and you know, and they were scaring people. They were saying to county employees, you know, we can't guarantee your job if we're out of power. And suddenly people were motivated, and this is exactly where the future is going to have to head for these organizations. And you know, and Jerry, you know, not like Jerry's a progressive. Jerry was, you know, Jerry's a fairly conservative Democrat, but he had, you know, anybody who just doesn't like the organization was for Jerry. And it's not like Jerry ran a bad campaign. Jerry ran a really good campaign. So this is just where it broke out, but it's because they took it seriously, and they did all the things they need to do, even the uncomfortable things, in order to win it.
I was impressed that they got their act together. Something you said earlier about Rob Menendez was he knew that his hair was on fire, right? And he figured that out in time. And I would put them in the same category. One of the things we don't talk about enough in politics is catching your opponent off guard, particularly when you're incumbent, when your opponent is in power. You need to catch them off guard, because if you don't catch them off guard, they have time to do what Menendez did or what Pasaic did. They have time to get it together. They have time to course correct. They have time to get themselves into action. And so I think, in a way, the line decision actually kind of helped them realize that they weren't going to have the safety net anymore, and that they were going to have to figure this out for themselves.
A few additional notes on Passaic County, just since we were talking about Passaic in the context of the Senate race. Passaic helpfully has a built-in municipality filter that lets me look at how individual towns voted. So Patricia Campos Medina's strength in Passaic County, unsurprisingly, does come from Patterson and Passaic. She came relatively close to winning both. I'm looking at Patterson right now. It was 43 for Kim, 31 for Campos Medina, and then actually 25% for Larry Ham. So that was also pretty solid. So he clearly had a foothold there. I was looking at Prospect Park, small borough, and Campos Medina actually carried it. It's the first town I've seen that Campos Medina won. And I think that part of this, I wonder how much of this also comes from, and this sort of segues into another couple of races that are worth at least briefly touching on. The uncommitted vote and the Muhammad Yarula vote in this area, where Campos Medina and Larry Ham were both quite loudly in support of a ceasefire. And that was the issue of Palestine was one that they both centered a lot in their campaigns, whereas Kim, I wouldn't say that Kim ran away from it or anything, but he took a more moderate stance, and it was not as big of a focus for him. And so I wonder if you're seeing a little bit of the voters for whom that was a driving issue. I could see them going towards Campos Medina and Ham, and a lot of those voters were concentrated in Passaic County. So then it's also worth mentioning. So I just published a story earlier today saying that the uncommitted slate, the Justice for Palestine, Peace in Gaza Now,
permanent ceasefire now.
Yeah. There. That's what it is. Seems to have won a DNC delegate in Passaic County, because some of them are elected statewide, and the uncommitted slate did not reach the vote threshold statewide. They needed 15%. They got about 9%. but there's also some delegates elected on a district level. And if you get 15% on a district level, then you become eligible for a delegate. And in the delegate district that includes Paterson, they got about 16%. So that's a ticket there. And then there were a couple of other districts, one in Jersey City, one in like Princeton, New Brunswick area, where they came quite close. It was like 14.9 and 14.3. The 14.9% in Jersey City, if there's late arriving ballots that tilt heavily towards uncommitted, and that alone could tip that in a second one. But so that's worth noting that there was definitely in Passaic County and in a couple of other areas, wasn't a huge percentage of the vote, but it was enough of the vote to have a tangible impact on the outcome of this presidential race, where Joe Biden is sweeping the vote. He's getting, what is it, statewide? 89% of the vote, not like, very solid, but there's still enough of a discontented contingent to actually have a tangible impact. And then just lastly, to touch on the 9th Congressional District, where it's Bill Pascrell versus Mohammed Khairullah. I think Pascrell did really well in this election. This was a real challenge from a guy who's, a sitting elected official in his district and who raised a decent amount of money and who had a real issue that he was running on that some voters were genuinely angry about. But in the end, I think that the evidence points towards Pascrell just being a longtime solid incumbent who has a good relationship with the people in his district, and B, this is an issue on which there is a segment of the electorate is very, very involved in this, and then a larger segment of the electorate that is not so much. So Pascrell won 77-23. He lost some precincts in Paterson. I think he lost Prospect Park. But overall, voters in this district and voters statewide are not keeping Gaza and Palestine sort of at the front of mind. It is a contingent of the party that is really paying attention to this, and it is a contingent that is pretty sizable in a couple of select areas. But overall, I think that the presidential primary and this 9th district primary show that the just sort of the general mainstream of the Democratic Party significantly outweighs it.
Yeah. We were looking to see if it had any kind of an impact for Bonnie Watson Coleman too, in the Princetons in her district, and it didn't affect her margin at all. So,
although that was in the opposite direction, where she was more pro-Palestine and pro-Gaza and pro-ceasefire than her opponent. And I was looking at that one to see whether there was any discontent in the opposite direction, whether there would be moderate residents of her district or Jewish residents of her district who would protest vote. And there was even less of evidence of that there. It was a similar situation where it's a somewhat real opponent, Daniel Dart, former Princeton School Board member, self-funded his way to like a decent amount of money, the kind of money that would at least let you send out a mailer to voters. And he got smoked 87-13. So maybe part of what this points to, more than any particular view on an issue, obviously the 9th and 12th districts are different districts, so they'd be voting on these things differently. But part of it is also just, we like our incumbents, we trust our organizations, we think that these people are doing a good job for us. They helped my cousin one time or whatever. And I'm perfectly fine with sending them back to Washington. The arguments of their challengers just aren't compelling enough.
And we can't really pick one specific thing that they did and pull that off. There are too many, our feelings about them are nuanced. We look at them in totality. We don't look at them based on one vote or one issue.
Right. You have to wonder how many voters in Bonnie Watson Coleman's district would say, well, I don't love her stance on Israel or something else, but I think she's overall good. Or someone in Pascrell's district saying, well, I don't love the idea of voting an 87-year-old back into Congress for another House term. But on the net, he's a good guy, and I'm perfectly happy to support him this time.
And you know what? That matches what the nuanced feelings that people have always had about Chris Smith. Chris Smith is the most pro-life guy in Congress for a very long time, and people never held it against him. His constituents never held it against him. So, it's a similar kind of a situation.
Incumbents are definitely allowed idiosyncrasies. And I think that might sort of, as you look towards the future for Rob Menendez, I feel like the sort of thing will be like, well, yeah, like we still don't like his dad. Well, I don't know what Bob Menendez's situation is going to be in 2 years or 4 years, but the son is fine and he's done good work and we like his vote on this. So it's whatever. So everyone will always have, if there's someone who is utterly and completely devoted to their incumbent member of Congress and says that they do nothing wrong, then I don't really trust that person. You're going to disagree with or you just haven't done enough research, because you're going to disagree with your Congress member.
There's a bunch of, if it's okay, Joe, to talk about some of the other counties, we look at some of these county-wide primaries, and I looked at Camden. I was watching Camden very closely because you know, for years, the South Jersey progressives have been saying, take away the lines, and suddenly these races are be competitive. Watch out, we can win this. They did better. They did better, no doubt about it. They did, the pan, the county commissioners were, performed better than Pam Lampett in an open race for county clerk. I think she was at the lower point. I think just under 60%. But these were significant wins, and we talked about this last Thursday. There was no bracketing, so the top candidate on the ballot was a guy from the progressive slate, and then it went to an organization, and then it was just all over the place, and voters found the candidates who they found those organization candidates, and I think again it's another point to look at, but one thing I saw in this race is there was a county commissioner, Al Dyer, who ran 4,000 votes behind Jeff Nash. Now Jeff Nash is the longest serving county commissioner in the state, but and he's on that ballot every 3 years, but Dyer's been there for a couple terms. Melinda Kane and Nash ran just about even, and then there's this 4,000 vote gap. So if we sort of look into the future and what we're going to see, I think the absence of organization lines is going to cause the organization to really take a hard look at who the candidates are, and they're going to say, we know what we're doing for them, and I'm just picking this one example. George Norcross may look at Al Dyer and say, Al, I know what we're doing for you. We're getting you votes, and we're putting you, in a county commissioner job, but what are you doing for us? What are you bringing to the table? You're not raising money. You're not pulling votes that we can't get on our own with anybody else. And I think what you're going to see up and down the state, and Joey and I have talked about it, and I think I've talked to Micah about it too. I've not discussed it with Ryan's two friends. Is you're going to have almost a day of reckoning between county organizations and candidates who have made an entire career depending upon the generosity of the organizations they're in. And if they're not bringing anything to the table, they're not getting, they don't have a base that brings you something that you can't get on your own, or they don't bring money into the organization that helps you fund, other like-minded candidates, what does the organization get out of them? They become fungible. They become interchangeable. And, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw some organizations begin to co-opt some of the, not the real, extreme hating renegades, but maybe some people that come with a little bit more of a progressive base. And you will, I think they're going to start looking at, well, we can't afford without a line to carry you anymore. And I think you may see a little bit more turnover. I looked at, I don't know if you want to, Joey, if you want me to go through the counties, I don't know if you want to talk. I mean, Micah wants to say something about Camden, I think, but.
No, I agree with you. I think Norcross and Company would tell you that they've been doing this for a long time. They have dumped legislators, they have dumped mayors who they did not feel were carrying their weight. But I agree that you'll see both. What are you bringing to the ticket? We may not be able to, just carry you. I think you'll see that. I think you'll also see the co-opting that you're talking about. I'll say that word because I think that's exactly what it is. We talked about it in the Hudson context before, incorporating them into the organization to the extent that you can. Mercer Dems have done this now for the last couple of years, where you don't get automatically re-upped. You have to compete. if you want the line again. So I think there are some examples out there that will probably accelerate now.
It's going to have to be a little bit more work. They're going to have to be a little more disciplined. I think you're going to see. I think you're going to see leadership in the legislature watching legislative campaign accounts and saying, "Wait a minute, you can't use campaign funds to, just go send flowers to people and buy all the ad journals and travel to some legislative conference. You really need to stockpile this money so that it's there for you in case somebody emerges as a challenger." I think it might force them to attract some better candidates.
And you might get aged out before you might get aged out before you're Sam Thompson, in the future.
Yeah, and I'll just if Joey will permit me, I'll do one quick thing on history, and that is, you during the Vietnam era, you had Eugene McCarthy and Robert Kennedy taking on Lyndon Johnson. You had George McGovern running for president, and what that brought was tons of new people into activist roles in the Democratic Party. But at the end of the day, the only ones who really had a lasting effect on winning elections, on affecting policy and affecting change, were those people who came out of the McCarthy, Bobby Kennedy, George McGovern movement, and then became part of the establishment. They ran for local office. They became municipal chairs. The best, without a doubt, hands down, the best example of that is Loretta Weinberg, who spent a lot of years kicking at the door and working on progressive causes. And some of the progressives forget that about her today. That she was on the ground floor of arguing on social justice issues and all these things that they care about today. But she realized that the only way that she's going to actually be able to change things is from the inside. And so she became part of the organization. She went from being a McGovern delegate to being, a party person. And she's a hugely consequential legislator. I think you're going to see that, and no lines gives them that opportunity. So, I think history might repeat itself a little bit here.
One corollary that I'll just sort of add to all of this is I think you're right that the parties will sort of start demanding more of their candidates because those candidates have to actually have to pull their weight. I think the Oprah vote, the vote on the Open Public Records Act from last month, sort of shows that there could also be some power shifting in the opposite direction, where these people who are, I'm talking about state legislators here specifically, who are in districts that are potentially vulnerable to a primary challenge in the line-free world, kind of have more leeway, or at least maybe should be given more leeway to say, I'm not going to vote for this. I don't think that my people are going to like this. And if you want me, a relatively, machine friendly, or, I'm your friend guy to hold on to this seat, then you got to let me go against this. And you sort of saw that with, the legislators who voted against the Oprah bill. They were, it was like Carol Murphy and Herb Conway in a congressional race at the time. So people who are actively campaigning for something sort of need to have that leeway. And then it was, people from Jersey City, it was people from Montclair, it was people from the district, including Princeton. It was people who represent districts that you can kind of see, oh, they might be worried about 2025. And so the degree to which the demands that can be made on incumbents to, okay, raise money, get votes, figure out how to be a real politician. We're not just going to be able to carry you anymore. But also the demands of the politicians to say, listen, I'll be your guy in Trenton, but you can't ask me to do X, Y, or Z because I know this district and I know that they're not going to go for that. You might lose this seat. So buck it up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if they're worried about as much losing the seat, because when you look at the map, these are people that would be replaced by nominees that are in a safe district. It's not that the party's worried as much about losing. In some cases, they're competitive, but they're not as much worried about about losing the seat as they are, losing for themselves.
Right, losing
And
the
this is,
primary.
and that's exactly where it is. Look, I think Camden shows this, but the bottom line is it's not so terrible to have to work hard to win an election. And it's not a bad thing for democracy that they have to go meet voters and make sure that their records are consistent with what their constituents want. You've had you know you know people have joked over the years that it's not the Democrats that are control. That's not the majority party in Trenton, and it's not the Republicans that are the majority party. It's the happy to be here caucus. The people that I'm not going to call them out individually, but I think we can all cite these examples of they're anointed into a seat, and they get there, and they've got the license plates, and they've got the district office, and they get to go to these events and then get introduced and wave to everybody, but it's not as much work as somebody who's in a swing district. And you look at a guy like Gopal, or Andy Zwicker, or Mike Testa, and Vince Palestina, Latham Tiver. These are people who could lose a general, but these are people that have won because they've worked really hard and they put their all into it. And then they're sitting in the room serving with people that they're just happy to be there. And I think what this Line lawsuit showed, and what the result I think is going to be. And by the way, nothing's been decided. Right. This was Zahid Qureshi, Judge Qureshi, saying that he believes it's a strong chance that it will prevail, but it's not over. There's still a process. There's
no order at this point.
Yeah.
The order was just the emergency for this year.
Yeah. So we shouldn't I think it's going to happen, but
And even if I'll just quickly add, even if the long-term court case doesn't resolve soon, I think that there's a strong chance that, well, I think there's a 100% chance that Steve Fulop and his type of person will just file another emergency.
They'll seek an emergency.
Absolutely, and some Republican will.
Some Republican will join in, and I think that'll almost certainly succeed if the longer-term lawsuit hasn't concluded yet.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah, the legislature's going to have to address this eventually, right?
Right, and they're gonna, and they'll, maybe there'll be, some areas on bracketing or something like that. But the other ones I wanted to point out, I looked at Essex County, and I thought this was interesting. Amir Jones got like 85% of the vote as a candidate for sheriff. Leroy Jones's son, but the under sheriff, and I went back. I was just curious, and Armando Fontoura has been hugely popular in Essex County since 1991. You really don't find a lot of people, even on the Republican side, who don't like Armando Fontoura. He's been a good sheriff. He's a good guy. He works hard. He shows up everywhere. He campaigns hard, even when he doesn't have to. And he had a bunch of primaries over the 34 years that he's been there. And he never got, and when he had a primary, he never got to 85%. So here's Amir Jones with no line. And he ran, because he had no line, he ran a real race. They were in, they did mail, they did, text messaging, they did digital, and he ran a real campaign and did better than Armando Fontoura ever did in a primary. So, I think there's a lesson there that, again, when you shake somebody and say you can't depend upon doing things the way you've always done it, they, like a business, they course adjust, and one obstacle is thrown at them and they find another way to do it. I thought that part of it was interesting. And then, I looked at Sussex County, where they've never had lines, and there are people are accustomed to doing that grassroots campaigning, I remember last year, Jack DeGroot, he was 24 at the time, graduate student, farmer. This is a guy who would get up at 5 in the morning, probably earlier. He was working on the farm a little bit, and then he would go out and he would basically stand on street corners in Sussex County when people were going to work and holding his sign and waving to them. I mean, that kind of basic grassroots campaigning. Here, the organization candidates, Chris Carney won. Alan Henderson beat an incumbent because he ran with Chris Carney with the support of most of the organization. It breaks my heart that Bill Winkler was so humiliated by doing so poorly there. I think here's a guy who's just got no friends left. And by the way, now that I said that, he's now going to write something nasty about me tomorrow because that's what he does. But I don't care. I don't really give a damn about that. But you really saw throughout here, with the exception of an Ocean County Democratic primary, which is sort of the outlier. These organizations held at these levels, but they work their candidates and they made them go out and really campaign. And I think that's just where it's going to be.
So one thing I saw on the other side, on the Republican side, where they still had their lines, at least for this week, for this year, the organization and their chair, Golden, Sean Golden, lost races in Rumson and in Howell.
Yeah.
So that was interesting, but almost lost a third race in Matawan. And it was a wild, crazy one. He and the Matawan chair kicked out the incumbent councilwoman, Melanie Wang, and his former executive director, Emily Sherdo, was behind a group that wanted to keep her. The person that they dumped her for was a lifelong Democrat, and I guess she's ahead by a few votes. But Esposito, the municipal chair, and Rob Clifton, the assemblyman, currently have a 2-vote lead on their county committee seats in Matawan. So the whole thing turned out to be a big mess, and they're ahead, but just barely.
Yeah,
could have lost it.
That's just sort of something that I feel like we see something like that every year, line or no line, where once you get down to the local level, there's just always lots of interesting things that happen. And there were lots this year too. And the New Jersey Globe wrote lots of little stories about a lot of them. One that I found kind of interesting, Lauren Dayton, who was an off-the-line assembly candidate in 2021, and then lost her council seat when she was pushed off the line in 2023. Now looks like she's headed back to the Tenafly Council this year.
And by the way, the person who beat her in that primary, one of the ones who beat her in that primary was another Tenafly, the Tenafly Democratic Municipal Chair, Shema Hader. She's now a second-term assemblywoman, and without a line, she lost. I think she lost her own county committee seat. So that's it's never a good sign when you're losing your own neighborhood. So
yeah, and so I mean, those kinds of things I think point towards the way that these local races are oftentimes very chaotic. They're based on, especially in towns that aren't that big, you could just have a grudge against your neighbor and just vote against them, and then that changes the whole result of something. It's people react very differently to those races. But I also think that some of them, and I mentioned Piscataway at the very beginning of this stream, I think that some of them do point just the sort of the new world that the line-free primary could create, where yes, we did not see a huge shift in power based on the end of the line in the Democratic primary or the Republican primary, although the line was still in place, obviously, in most of the state there. You're not seeing a political earthquake. I think the biggest change that's happening is Andy Kim is going to probably become a U.S. senator, and that's been known for months because he didn't have serious opposition. But I think when you get down to the local level, you do see these kinds of inklings of, oh, so this is maybe a sign of voters reacting differently to these ballots. This is maybe a sign of what could happen if an incumbent in the assembly gets caught sleeping in 2025, or if a county commissioner race sort of devolves into like a 4-way open brawl or whatever. So I guess that's as we reach my self-imposed deadline for this live stream, that's my sort of parting thought. is in the headline races, the races that are going to merit even a brief mention in the New York Times, and that we're going to devote most of this live stream to talking about. Yes, the organization's held up, but there are definitely signs that is not necessarily going to be the case if the line stays away. If certain circumstances collide in certain ways, you can absolutely see a future where New Jersey politics does look very different, and where the loss of the line really does matter. So we'll just have to wait to find out.
Yeah, and Joey, there's just a couple other races I want to mention. I'll do
Oh
them
yeah,
very
sorry,
quickly.
go ahead.
I'll do them quickly, but that's Bloomfield mayor's race where there was an appointment when the mayor Mike Venezia went to the state assembly. The party wanted Jenny Mundell, councilwoman. The council picked Ted Gamble, one of their council members. Mundell ran. She was supposed to run on the line. There was no line. She still won that fairly handily. Her running mate won a council race there. Hugely important for the Middlesex County Democrats is they switched the form of government in Perth Amboy from nonpartisan with a runoff to a partisan election where whoever gets the most votes wins, and they got heavily behind the mayor Helman Kaba. He was facing Joe Voss, who he had beaten, who he had run against before, son of a former mayor, Ken Gonzalez, former municipal court judge. Perth Amboy, big town, important for the anchor of Middlesex County. This is a place where the organization was actively involved in local races, like they were for Brian Waller. They went heavily into that race. The organization was running it. Kevin McCabe, Edis Delgado. They were involved on a daily basis there. They won it outright. Now they don't have to worry about a nonpartisan November election and how who's going to co-opt that small group of Republicans and the bigger that bigger turnout from the general, and what do we do if there's a runoff and then we have to regroup and we're running a campaign in November, so in December for a runoff. That was just a very important win for them. And then the other one, just because it's one of my favorite stories of the year, and that is Reddington, where you have an interesting divide between two factions of a Republican Party. One is sort of the old guard, who were sort of the Tom Kean Sr. type Republicans who were more moderate. A bunch of them endorsed Tom Malinowski, when he ran for re-election. Sort of that old time group, and then you had the new people, and they are decidedly more conservative. Led by Vinnie Panico, who had run for the assembly a couple of years ago. Openly pro-Trump, and just believed in different things, and there was a real pull there. But the part of it that I like the best is that like you see in many local races, allegations of lawn sign theft. And we've all, and I haven't written a lawn sign theft story in 20 years because, it's just the way, it happens. And I just haven't really thought it was news. But here they did it a little differently. Here they said, well, our line signs are getting stolen and we're going to prove it. So they attached electronic tracking devices to some of the lawn signs. They had hunters, cameras up in the trees, and they caught a councilman from the other faction. Their Apple AirTag on their phone. They're looking at their phone, and our signs are on the move. And all of a sudden, they're at this councilman's house, and he was arrested in his home at 11:30 at night, and now has to deal with with theft charges in municipal court because they've done that. And the reason I'm telling the story, first of all, because it's just so New Jersey, right? Where else but New Jersey would somebody attach electronic device, tracking devices to their lawn signs and catch them and get somebody arrested? It's just a very Jersey story. But there's a reason I'm going to be repetitive on this. Even throughout the campaign, maybe the time for stealing lawn signs is coming to a close. There are cameras everywhere. People have these Ring doorbells. These smart doorbells. There's cameras in busy areas of town, and maybe the solution to this, maybe the reason the Reddington story needs to get told is don't steal lawn signs anymore. Maybe the days of stealing them are over. So I just I thought that was an interesting race. And Maplewood, I have to add Maplewood because hugely progressive town, endorsed Andy Kim very early. I think like last November. Soma Action, there's a lot of progressive groups that are not really organizations. They're more like clubs or two people. And by the way, the same thing on the right. It's just two angry people sitting in a diner with their iPhone. But Soma Action is an organization, and they got behind Andy Kim early, but one of the incumbents got beat there, and the two incumbents had the organization. They didn't have a line, but they had the organization backing and the slogan. So there were some areas where some of these local races were just hugely important. Go ahead, Joey.
I mean, I think that. Would you like that to be your closing thoughts, or do you have anything?
No, I just think it's important to raise those. I mean, I didn't get into Plumstead or anything like that. I just I left it at that one. So.
That is definitely New Jersey's absolute surfeit of municipalities. Means every primary and general election, we could, if we wanted to, just talk about an infinite number of election results. It is kind of shocking just how many options there are.
Well, while we're on the topic, wasn't there a story of the Tom Zero mayor tampering with the sign too recently? I saw some.
Signs are always there, and it's weird because the morning that I ran the story, I got some calls from some Democratic operatives and Republican operatives. I don't want to make it like it was both parties, and I got a bunch of calls from people who do campaigns for a living, or they run campaigns in an area of the state, and not one of them said to me, "Wow, we better not steal signs." They said they were all to each and every one of them. Tell me how this worked. What do you buy? What's the product? Where we can really track it on our iPhone, and they so it's not like they didn't want to. It's not like they were delivering this message of no more lawn sign theft. There was how can we track our signs? Explain to me how this is done. So, I think it's going to be a long path there.
It's good. It's the new normal.
Yeah.
It's a lot of that'll cost money though to track every sign, but they have it.
Well, so my thinking is that then there will be a little cottage industry of little plastic chips that look kind of like they might be tracking something. And so then you get like 3 real trackers and like 400 little nothings, and just sort of trust the panopticon to make people feel like they might be being watched, so they better not steal it. I see that little chip down there. Who knows whether it's a real one?
Or if there's like a tornado or just high winds and the sign blows away.
Yeah, and you look at Brian Stack in Union City. He mails. They don't do lawn signs in Union City because there's not a lot of lawns. He does those old-fashioned window signs.
Yeah,
and mails one.
Very New York.
Just he puts a window sign in the mail to everybody in his district, everybody in his city, and then that's the old school way of doing it. It's not as easy to steal the sign if it's in the window of their apartment. So
yeah,
that would have to be family on family crime at that point.
Yes.
I don't like it that you're supporting.
And by the way,
I'm going to take your sign down.
Stack doesn't need an electronic tracking device. If somebody took his signs, he would find them. It's just he doesn't need that. He'll figure it out, or he'll just show up with new ones. No problem. So.
All right, Ryan, Micah, any sort of closing thoughts that might bring us home?
I wanted to bring up really quick. We talked about uncommitted briefly, and AP has not allocated 3 district delegates yet because 3 of them might go to uncommitted, and that is in delegate district 10, 16, and 17. Uncommitted is like just below 15% in district 10, and also district 16, and it's also slightly above 15% in district 17. So has it look if the results were certified right now, uncommitted would get an extra delegate to the convention for district 17, which is Hudson County. It's actually my delegate district where I live. So the northern Hudson County portion. Yeah, and the other 2, the vote's it's still too close to allocate those delegates, but just FYI, they could get 1 to 3 more delegates, in my opinion.
Are you talking about the 17th delegate district?
Yeah, we haven't allocated 10, district 10, 16, and 17. I think 16, I don't think uncommitted will get that delegate in district 16. Look at the vote now in our system, but definitely quite possible in district 10 and 17.
So I mean, I'm just looking at it in 17 because I think it's entirely Hudson County. The Hudson County website still has it at 14.86.
That might be because we don't tabulate write-ins, so it does change the margin a little. But once the results certify, we'll incorporate the. So the margin is a little bit different because in our system because we don't tabulate write-in votes at AP.
I think that write-ins might push it below 15%. Although I don't know. I don't know whether there's any kind of argument about whether write-ins shouldn't be counted in order to. Who knows whether this will become a whole thing? But I think write-ins.
Well, it was a thing in Monmouth District 6 and 7. So compared to the countywide average, the write-in vote percentage like quadrupled and tripled in those districts 6 and 7 where there was no one committed. So not a humongous dent in the race, but more write-in votes than like countywide, for example.
Yeah.
For the very small Democratic voters in those delegate districts.
Yeah, so that's something that we'll just sort of have to. There's always things. One other thing that we didn't actually bring up is the 2nd district Democratic primary that is still unresolved. It's one of the only primaries that's still unresolved, and so that's something we'll still have to watch to see what the result is there.
And I think we'll know that in the next. We'll know that in the next day or so, and it's an odd situation where election officials opened up 1,800 vote by mail ballots weeks before they were legally allowed to, and there's a question as to whether they're going to be allowed to vote, and
that's a little.
I'll tell you this in terms of I always heard about the 80-20 rule. It seems in New Jersey issues regarding these counting of votes. It's a 99-1 rule that 99 out of every 100 legal issues involving elections take place in Atlantic County, and it happens all the time. But the good news there is, there are some good judges when it comes to election issues. There's some really crappy judges when it comes to election issues. But Atlantic County, where they have the most, they have the best judge in the state, Michael Blee, when it comes to knowing election law and being deliberative and wait. And I watched this hearing a couple days ago. The deputy attorney general said, "Well, my boss says we need you to make a ruling today, Judge, on whether we can count them." And Blee is like, "I don't really care what your supervisor told you. I'm gonna look into this. I'm gonna research it. I'm gonna listen to the legal arguments, and then I'll make a decision when I'm ready to." But Blee is deliberative, but also fast. You remember, this is the guy. Maybe I'm making an argument for a Stack Blee ticket. Down the road, but Blee is also the guy on Jersey Freedom that froze the account of this, dark money group, running a phantom candidate, Giuseppe Costanzo. I haven't said that, on these things in a while. So I think you'll have a winner there in the next couple of days.
So that's something we'll still be tracking, and then the uncommitted is something else we'll still be tracking, and anything else that's still outstanding. Micah, anything to bring us home?
No, David mentioned Plumstead, which is right over. I mean, it's about a few thousand feet on the other side of my property, and watched it with interest because it had really been taken over by a very conservative faction, and specifically a religious conservative faction, and Dominic Cuozzo lost big time to a group of just regular Plumstead people who were taking back the town. We're not happy with the very conservative turn of policy and religious policy, and so it's a course correction that a lot of neighbors of theirs are looking upon and saying, okay, this is a return to normalcy.
I mean, and I think that has sort of been the theme that we've been looking at this whole time without really saying it, that every single one of these primaries is obeying its own rules, and you can look at each of them and you can figure out sort of what rules it was playing under. But unlike in a general election where I could come up with some really easy thesis that sort of binds it all together, because oftentimes, Republicans do really well this time, or it's a bit mixed bag or whatever. Primaries are always just lots of different voters making lots of different decisions for lots of different reasons. So you have more conservative candidates winning in Reddington with that whole drama. And then the drama in Plumstead goes the opposite direction, where it's this very specific local context of the sort of religious faction. And progressive Democrats winning and moderate Democrats winning and off the line and on the line. And everyone's just doing different things. And we'll always be here to track it. So
and that can happen in these low turnout situations. That can happen in these situations where 15% of the electorate is making these decisions.
Yeah. And Joey, if I could say one last thing, and that is, this primary is just sort of the prequel to the race that everybody really cares about, which is, who's going to be the next governor of New Jersey. And I think the lessons here are that what you saw in this primary, all of these issues, with these things that we're talking about, you can be sure that the candidates for governor on both sides are going to rip these lessons apart in detail and figure out exactly what it means, almost town by town. And this is the lessons learned in Tuesday's primary are going to weigh heavily on Steve Fulop and Josh Gottheimer and Mikey Sherrill and Steve Sweeney, and I don't want to leave anybody out. Ed Durr and John Bramnick and Bill Spadia and Jack Chittarelli. They're not going to necessarily be able to do it the way everybody else is doing it, and they're going to look on where they get those. My friend Bob Franks used to sit in meetings and say, okay, that's all good, but how do we get some of those, what do you call them, votes? Ultimately, you need votes, and this primary election is going to serve as a roadmap to gubernatorial candidates on how they can assemble coalitions of people in towns and in counties that'll get them to have more votes than everybody else. Real simple math. So.
And with that, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to David Wildstein, Micah Rasmussen, Ryan Dubicki. Thanks to all of our news organizations for helping us, and colleges and universities. And thank you to all the candidates who ran, both those who won and those who lost. You guys are A, what makes our jobs interesting, and B, what makes democracy possible. So thanks for throwing your hats in the ring. And I hope everyone has a great night. I hope you all maybe learn something or learn something new about how to think about these things. So signing off. Good night.
Good night, guys.